Lesson 2. Literary genres in Africa. African literature is a marriage of literary works ranging from oral literature to works scribed in colonial languages like European, Portuguese, French and English. Important truths are stressed with careful separation between art and content. Hence, its literature is generally inclusive as it implied artistry through words and communicated. Literary genres in African literature. There are 3 categories of African literature: traditional oral literature, literature written in indigenous African languages and literatures written in European languages. The Africanist tapping, 1990, dates back how Africans consumed their own traditions, customs and norms as they write through the manner of orality. This distinctive component is both a reservoir and a repertoire of models that eludes what African literature is all about. Traditional oral literature. Written and unwritten traditions are significant in the transmission and composition of oral literatures. The unwritten forms, however, are far less familiar. Although they are much difficult to record and preserve, this gave birth to orature as the earliest African oral forms. The nature of storytelling. Storytelling is a pigment of conversations defining the sensory union of image and idea. It embodies the culture of the past, recounting fantasy images to invoke general response among the audience. During a performance, the storyteller's art combines the audience's present waking state and its past conditions of semi-consciousness, reliving history until it becomes the audience memory, eliciting contemporary images to fuse past from the present. Storytelling is acquainted with connections between humans, within the world, society and family. Its interdependence to the social core of beliefs, the language involving visuals, the patterning of image, the manipulation of the storyteller's voice and body and the present state of the audience marked familiarity as a crucial part in storytelling. Hence, familiar images and metaphors are used to make stories more meaningful. Stories revolved around cosmic transformations, heroic adventures, and transformations on every man's life, changes and gods being central characters. There are other forms of oral literature. Myths are structural devices of storytellers. Metaphors are both material and method. Gunner, 2020. Riddles are comparison between two unlike objects and are mostly in figurative form. During the process of riddling, a literal and figurative stage work, from reality and fantasy, and evokes emotion through metaphors. Here is an example. I have 10 servants that obey to my orders, they help me whenever I need them, they nourish me, help me wear my clothes, and they turn the pages of my book when I am reading. They never argue among themselves. Who are they? My fingers. The question is more like a statement and the answer is more like an elusive sentence, referring analogously to something else. In the given example, notice how the first 2 statements describe the image while the last sentence predicts a familiar image in comparison to the description. In simple riddles, generalizations of some images are illustrated recognizing the similarity of characters, situations, places and others. Riddles are closely related to proverbs. Both involve analogy, meaning, sound, and rhythm, which make it a distinct type of literary expression in African literature. There are different forms of African riddles from various tribal groups. Little things that defeat us, mosquitoes, tonga, water standing up, sugarcane, malum, be born come morning, give birth, milk, fulani, the little white cat in the wild grass, scissors, shona, the house in which one does not turn around, tomb, lamba. One group of riddles documented for Leopoldville mirrored a connection with proverbial sayings. Known as Devinets Proverbis, Comhair Sylvain, 1949, the 2 proverb riddles reflects man's fortune and morality. In South Nigeria, tone riddle is the response to the introduced type of proverb riddle. Tone riddles develop the eloquence of children who are urged to possess verbal skills while young. However, the proverb riddle turned out to be more metaphorically significant. In South Africa, the bird riddle is a competitive dialogue or intellectual argument between 2 boys witnessed by an audience. Each has to prove a point, providing an assertion, an analogy liking to a person. The freshness of idea, the wit and humor plays an edge to win over a competitor. Jordan, 1958. Here is an example. Challenger. What bird do you know? Proposer. I know the white-necked raven challenger. What about him? Proposer. That he is a missionary. Challenger. Why so? Proposer. Because he wears a white collar and a black cassock, and is always looking for dead bodies to bury. Song riddles are from the Makwa, which are unrecorded elsewhere in Africa. These riddles, akano, are connected with initiation rituals which include sexual references or allusions. Praise names, proverbs and riddles are also shaded with other forms of oral literature with enigmas, puzzle stories and dilemma stories. As it represents a concise form of conventional stereotyped expression, it is also regarded as a form of amusement among children. As a minor form of art in African literature, the imagery and poetic comment are clear parts of general literary history. African proverbs were parts of the metaphorical experience as it established bonds with the real life among the members of the audience or the wisdom from past life. These are metaphors likened to a lyrical poetry riddle deriving aesthetic experience from comprehending its complexity. Many African proverbs included animals and earth to unravel life lessons. A clearer example is a Zimbabwe proverb, "There is honey but no bees," meaning one takes results without any sweat or undertaking. Here are other examples. 1. A bird that flies off the earth and lands on an anthill is still on the ground. Igbo proverb 2. He that beats the drum for the madman to dance is no better than the madman himself. African proverb 3. Where water is the boss there the land must obey. African proverb 4. When the shepherd comes home in peace, the milk is sweet. Ethiopian proverb 5. Teeth do not see poverty. Maasai proverb 6. You have little power over what's not yours. Zimbabwean proverb 7. Better little than too little. Cameroonian proverb 8. You must attend to your business with the vendor in the market, and not to the noise of the market. Beninese proverb 9. When you befriend a chief, remember that he sits on a rope. Ugandan proverb The tale is also one of the dynamic representations of oral literatures. It is lyrical and rhythmically analyzed. The simplest stories are converted in cyclical movement, often accompanied by songs for a more complex development. The trickster tale provides insights into the construction of stories and makes use of masks to create illusions describing the metaphorical state of storytelling. Here is an excerpt from The Place and the People, a South African tale folktale. Notice how the character was described and how descriptions were leading readers into how African life should be understood. That he was a consummate actor, and, not to put too fine a point on it, an old humbug of the first water, goes without saying, for these characteristics are inherent in the native nature. But in spite of this, and the uncanniness of his appearance, there was something about Oude Karel that drew one to him. Of his real devotion to his master and the beautiful family van der Merwe, there could be no question, while, above everything, was the feeling that here was one of an outcast race, one of the few of the original inhabitants who had survived the submerging tide of civilization, who, knowing no law but that of possession, had been scared and chased from their happy hunting grounds, first by the Hottentots, then by the powerful Bantu, and later by the still more terrifying pale-faced tribes from over the seas. Though the origin of the Bushman is lost in the mists of antiquity, the Hottentot conquest of him is a matter of history, and it is well known that the victors were in the habit, while killing off the men, to take unto themselves wives from among the women of the vanquished race. Hence, the fact that a perfect specimen of a Bushman is a rara avis even in the localities where the last remnants are known to linger. The heroic poetry or panegyric was a lyrical rhythmic union of images combining oral traditions and historical fragments in metaphorical ways. It involved the fusion of emotions into forms. Among the Tuareg of Western Africa, heroic poetry was accompanied by music and was composed mostly of women. The Songhai presented them with professional bards in rituals and celebrations. In Mauritania, it is the Iggiw who performs while plays and sings the songs of the warriors. In Saniki, the Diare goes to wars with soldiers and urges them to place martial activities within the context of history and genealogy. In Hausa, Morocco was accompanied by trumpets and drums. Yoruba bards chant the Iyala, the Omwevugi among the Hima of Uganda and the Mbongi wa Kufusha among the Tonga of Mozambique. Other forms of oral literature. The first African literature is circa 2320 BC, which began when Egyptians wrote scriptures and burial texts to accompany their dead. The first writing system is hieroglyphics and later produced the first written accounts of creation known as Memphite Declaration of Deities. There were also records of the first earliest literacy in the world using hieroglyphs. Prose narratives flourished. Myths and legends are considered historical narratives which are accounts of traditions and culture. Proverbs are the most collected form of African literature. Folktales feature animals, divinities, kings and queens, divine tricksters and little people. They are the best-known narratives, which were told during the night, influencing the readers because of its high dramatic quality. Praise poems are epithets in reference to an achievement or a distinction. Most praise poems are exclusively written and carefully compiled for special occasions. Epics are long literary forms recounting the heroic pursuits of ancestors. The song of lament known as dirges is performed during funeral ceremonies, praising the memories of the departed to be protected to his next life. Written literatures as a literature of testimony, novels, plays and poems during early period were not accessed due to the small percentage of readership among Africans. In 1930, awareness on the discrepancies between racial identity and social values was called upon by black intellectuals who initiated a literary movement in defense of negritude. Its emergence produced three waves of literacy in Africa. A. Written works were discovered in Europe written as early as the German and Celtic languages of Western Europe. B. Islam emerged in the 7th century in northern Africa due to jihad or holy wars, and c. Missionary activities, trade relations, and colonialism flourished ignited the third wave of literacy in Africa. Themes in the literary traditions were influenced by religions Christianity and Islam. A clearer interaction between literary works and oral traditions was seen on epics and novels such as the works of the early writers of the 20th century, Amos Tutuola of Nigeria, Dio Faginwa in Yoruba, Violet Dube in Zulu, Sek Makai in Xhosa, and Mario Antonio in Portuguese. Some of the written works using indigenous African language include Surat Antara, the Antar Romance, an epic masterpiece written by Antar. He is an Afro-Arab warrior poet who died in 615 AD and popularized Antarist or Antaria as a style in writing. There are also witty verses written for the Abbasid court in Thailand written by Abu Dulama ibn al-Jan, an Afro-Persian known as the Black Nightingale. Literatures in African languages. Written literatures in African languages include Ethiopian, Hausa, Shona, Somali, Southern Sutu Swahili Xhosa, and Yokuba. Most Ethiopian literatures are in Ge'ez, literary language from the 13th century, and Amharic, used for political and religious purpose, which are considered as two most common spoken language. The Kebra Nagast, Glory of Kings, 1314–1322, recounts Menelik's birth, who became the king of Ethiopia. It became a milestone in Ethiopia's literature and culture. Many religious works translations were produced, including the first major work in Ethiopia, the Ta'amra Mariam, The Miracles of Mary. European works like John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress was also translated by Gabra Georgis Turfi, who later influenced Amharic literary works. Two writers founded Amharic literary tradition, Afawork Gabra Iyasis, who wrote Lib Wailed Tariq, the first written novel, 1908, an imagined story, and Harui Valda Selasa, the first major writer, who wrote Hadis Alem, 1924, The New World. Germachov Tekel Hawariat, 1949–1950, David III, wrote one of the most popular novels entitled Araya. Kabada Mikhail became a significant biographer, historian, and playwright. Dramas, historical novels, and poetry in Amharic continue to flourish until the 21st century. The first Hausa novel was Muhammadu Bello's Gandoki. It also gave birth to Amos Tutola's English-language novel The Palm Wine Drunkard, 1952. Hausa drama was greatly influenced by oral tradition reflected from the works of poets Ibn al-Sabig and Muhammad al-Barnawi. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Hausa language was written in an Arabic script called Ajami. A historical novel entitled Fesso, 1956, was considered to be the first literary work to be published in Shona, written by Solomon M. Mutswero. Another early novel includes Bernard T. G. Chidziro's Nzvangamutsvero, 1957, Dodge the Broom, dominated prose writing in Shona. The first published poetry in Shona was Soko Racina Musoro, 1958, The Tale Without a Head, written by Herbert W. Chitepo. Another poet, Wilson Chivora, wrote poetry which was later published in Madedambedzo, 1969, and appeared in journals as Poet, Tu, Tone, and Charimo. A collection of traditional stories in the Somali language named Hikmat Somali, Somali Wisdom, was recorded by Mus Zaji Ismashil Galal and was published in 1956. Shire Jamak Axmed published materials on Somali's oral traditions entitled Gabayo, Mama Iyo Shikoy and Yarire, 1965, poems, proverbs, and short stories. He later edited a literary journal, Iftainka Akonta, Light of Education, and published two novels in 1973, Halgonkali Inolosha, Life Struggle, and Roaksan, The Spirits. Poetry is a major expression of Somali's oral traditions, which includes types like the chanted ones, the Gabe and the Giifto, the war poem Girar, the Barambar, composed mainly of women, and poetry as a weapon, the Hilo or Balwo. Drama was made familiar in Somali language with Hassan Sheikh Mumin's play Shabilnagud, Leopard Among the Women, in 1968. Somalia's daily newspaper reflected several stories from Axmed Farak's Kali's Idaja and Yusuf's Axmed's Hero. Ali Sugul wrote the first play in Somali, Samawada, 1968, showing women's struggles of independence after the World War II. The first published novel in Somali was Akundaro wa Ayu Ankab Jakail, 1964, Ignorance is the Enemy of Love, written by Farak's Mam Jamak Kal. To date, Somali literatures dealt with contemporary history. Southern Sutu's first writer was Azariel M. Sekis, who collected Sutu's oral traditions and published them in a compilation Makwa Aya Basutu Lamaile Lalitsimo, 1893, customs and stories of the Sutus and wrote a popular animal story entitled Bukana Ea Somo Tsa Pitso Ea Linanyana, Lisiko Ea Sefafula Saritsa, 1928, The Book of the Meeting of the Birds, and the lawsuit between Sitofu and Saritsa. Historical events are central in southern Sutus literatures, like in dramas, novels and plays. These were J. Machobane's Mahaang Amatso, 1964, In the Dark Caves, B. Makalo Kakatla's play Mashushula Barudi, Mashushu and Missionaries, S. M. Guma's historical novel S. King Molomi, 1960, and Queen Monthethesis, 1962. Sutu poetry is mostly derived from oral traditions. Thomas Mokopu Mofolo is a giant literary figure in southern Sutu literature who had written 3 novels, Moti Oa Bochabella, 1907, The Traveler of the East, Pitsang, 1910, The Pot, and Chaka, 1925, a historical romance. Earliest dramatic works also include M. L. Miley's Ramasoabi Lapatso, 1937, Ramasoabi and Patso, and T. M. Mofokang's Sakona Sa Joala, A Mug of Beer. The conflict between Sutu tradition and the West, including Christianity, were mostly the themes of Sutu writings. Xhosa literature started with the first literary piece, the hymn written by Ntsakana in the early 19th century. London Missionary Society established the Lovedale Press, which published the Wesleyans Shumayeli Indaba, The Preacher's News, 1837 to 1841, and was the center of Xhosa writings. Ikwezi was the next publication established in 1945, then later with a magazine, Izatuniwa Sanyanga, The Monthly Messenger, but interrupted by one of the frontier wars. It was replaced by a monthly journal both in Xhosa and English, the Indaba, The News, and the Caliph Express in 1876, and later with Izajidimi Sama Xhosa, The Xhosa Messenger. Imvo Zabantsundu, Opinions of the Africans, and Izwi Labantu, The Voice of the People, were newspapers published in 1888. Much of Xhosa poetry and prose appeared in these periodicals. Many early writers of prose and verse were influenced by Christianity. Makhai was called the father of Xhosa poetry. The greatest contribution in Xhosa writing and was one of Africa's finest novels, Ingchumbo Yemanyanya, 1940. The Wrath of the Ancestors, was written by A.C. Jordan. Most Xhosa writings were focused on the relationship between African tradition and the intrusion of the West into African societies. Dio Faguna's Ogboju Ode Ninu Igbo Irunmale, 1983, The Forest of a Thousand Demons, an oral tale, was the framework of the best-known work in Yoruba and a significant contribution of the Yoruba language fiction. The history of Yoruba literature moves from realism with the structures of the story, the characters and the events. Oral traditions and impetus from the West are the competing forces in the Yoruba literatures. The earliest literary works were translations of Bunyan's The Pilgrim Progress, Ilo Sawaju Ero Mimo in 1866, and the Bible, Bibeli Mimo in 1900. There was also a series of Yoruba school readers, Iwe Kika Yoruba, 1909 to 1915, containing prose and poetry. The first written poetry was written by poets J. Sobowale Sawande and Akolawole Ajisafe, dealing with personal and historical experiences. Other significant playwrights include Faleti, Olabimtan, Hubert Ogunde and Duroladipo. Zulu literatures of the 19th and 20th centuries have 2 categories, traditional life and customs and Christianity. The movement from the oral to the written literatures constituting Zulu history became smooth. John Langalibalele Dube became the first Zulu to write a novel in his native language with Insila Ka Shaka, 1933, Shaka's Servant. RRR Diholomo published a popular series of 5 novels on Zulu kings, U Dingane, 1936, Ushaka, 1937, U Mpand, 1938, U Sechwayo, 1952, and U Dinizulu, 1968. Historical dramas, written forms as venues for sermonizing, stories and reproduction of oral to the written writing were mirrored through novels, contemporary stories and poetry. Nyambizi's most successful novel, Mentanami, has themes in conflict with Zulu tradition and urbanization. The finest Zulu poetry can be found in 2 collections by Nxumalo, Ikwezi, 1965, The Morning Star, and Umzwangwa, 1968. The second half of the 20th century include Deuteronomy Bakinkozi Z Natuli, Amangwavu, 1969, Uppercats, and others. African literatures in foreign languages. The history of Afrikaans literature is the history of Afrikaners, an alienated group of people whose literature was a testimony to that state of alienation. Afrikaans, which originated from Dutch, has been spoken in South Africa by whites since the 18th century. Die Patriot, The Patriot, was the first newspaper in Afrikaans, began publication in 1876. Afrikaans became a significant theme in written language were the subjects of early Afrikaans literature. Poets became the most potent harbingers of the new language as the second Afrikaans language movement began. Toon van den Heever was the greatest and most original poets of the early 20th century. Realism dominated Afrikaans prose seen in the work of Joachim van Bruggen, who wrote Trilogy, taking note of the first part entitled Ampi, Die Natuurkind, 1931, Ampi, the Child of Nature. A. Pienaar, Sanjiro, wrote popular books about animals. Drama flourished over the works of Leipold, Langenhoven and H. A. Fagan. Bart Nell, 1936, dealt with African rebellion written by Johannes van Mel was considered as the finest novel in Afrikaans. In 1954, Arthur Fulla became the first black African to write a novel in Afrikaans. Bartho Smit wrote Puts Underwater, 1962. Well Without Water, was the finest play written in Afrikaans. Events in the 1930s paved a new type of poetry with Afrikaner poets known as the Dertingers, 30ers, 1930, who centered on experimentation with form in poetry. The Zestigers, 60ers are writers of the 1960s, attempted to write in prose. Poetry flourished on the middle of the 20th century while short story was on the late 20th century with blends of folklore, historical events and Portuguese colonialism.